Bought it in 2003.
Mm-hmm.
I had gardens back then that I've always grown organically,
Mm-hmm.
but not certified. We started out with 40 acres,
Yeah.
actually like 39. Then we bought 1 acre, and then we ended up buying the north 40.
Okay.
Yes. And we leased that to a guy that does conventional, but I
Okay.
put like a 5 acre buffer in between. I have it marked out. I have a little map I can show you, but I have it all marked out just around the growing beds, but I do not do anything conventional in that area. So
Yeah.
it leaves a nice buffer.
So what all do you produce in your beds?
I have a list. It's a lot.
Yeah.
General vegetables
General
and
vegetables.
fruits.
Yeah.
Like annual, I've got annual vegetables, and then I've got like some asparagus that's perennial, brambles, strawberries, mostly strawberries. Because supposedly, like any manipulation of the soil just disturbs it. So I take the trade-off of using the plastic landscape fabric because it saves me from having to, and then that way I can't remember the last time I tilled anything.
Really?
Now, when I do the new beds with the BCS, yes, I'm going to be flipping soil over, but like the main bed is just going to have soil put on top of it. So that's still going to have some structure to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the future, all you really need to do is kind of just push through your aisles
Yeah.
to throw the soil back up on the top. I think I'm hoping.
And so you find that the minimal like soil,
Disturbance,
tillage, helps
yes.
your fertility and your
Oh,
yield.
yeah.
And,
And like
yeah.
when I peel up the landscape fabric at the end of the season or whatever, I mean, there are just worms everywhere.
Yeah.
I do it by families.
Mhm.
So if you're familiar with Jade
Yeah.
Fortier, everyone's like, they either love him or they hate him. But he kind of puts like a greens, roots, family, tomatoes, and then I have a list. Basically, I have like 4, onions, and then that way I can color code it and look and see like where tomatoes is the big one. Like you don't want to put that in the same spot every year. So like tomatoes, potatoes, peppers all go in that family. And then I'm like a visual person. I'm also a graphic designer. So I have all my gardens like mapped out in blocks. And then that way I can just color code it by year and go, okay, tomatoes here. Because it's simple.
Yeah.
So.
And what, you mentioned cover crops. What are you using?
Buckwheat, some oats, like with the garlic, hairy vetch, and then winter rye. And I've got some clover I've ordered this year too, so I'm gonna try that.
Yeah.
Crimson clover, not the white stuff. Like, why would you ever plant that in your garden bed?
Why is that?
Because it's impossible to eradicate it.
Oh, really?
White clover.
Yeah.
So my name is Dr. Chris Murakami. I'm an assistant professor of agroecology at Chatham University, which is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I also help manage the agroecology demonstration garden there, and based out of the Eden Hall campus, which is about 40 minutes north of Pittsburgh. The system that the farmer is describing here sounds like a really great approach, and it sounds like that she has her systems kind of dialed in here to be able to optimize and continue to build soil health, including the kind of introduction of cover crops and minimizing tillage and keeping the soil covered and things of that nature. One thing that I'll note in an intensive system like this is just making sure for any growers who are kind of either considering integrating cover crops or kind of continuing to refine their practices, kind of thinking through the full lifespan of the cover crop, having a clear plan for when the cover crop would you needed to get in the ground, thinking about how that then becomes connected to when the kind of preceding crop needs to come out of the ground. When looking at the use of legumes, particularly if you're trying to maximize any potential benefit of leguminous nitrogen fixation, being clear about kind of when that peak nitrogen fixation is going to occur, which typically is around the flower stage, but then making sure that termination happens before a seed set, and then you may have the kind of possibility of creating weed problems for yourself downstream. And so, therefore being, really clear about what the termination process looks like, and how you're going to be able to kind of coordinate and orchestrate that dance of your cash crops and the cover crops that are being integrated. This kind of management intensive approach, like there's so many different layers to it. It's really remarkable, but just kind of for growers that are considering some of that, that kind of caution and recommendation to look thoroughly at that. The other note, I guess, would be particularly for leguminous cover crops, if you haven't grown them there before, it's a good idea to make sure that you have an inoculant that is paired with a particular kind of family of legumes that you're working with. And so those are kind of coating the seeds before you plant them. And it's just a way to make sure that those rhizobia species are present in the soil that are associating with the legumes to help make sure that that nitrogen fixation could happen. And then if you really want to get into it, you could kind of sneak a peek at some of the nodules that'll appear on the roots, and look for the presence of a kind of pinkish color on the root nodule, which is leg hemoglobin, and has this kind of red pink hue, which again is this kind of evidence that there's some nitrogen fixation occurring. For growers who may be kind of drawn to the no-till or minimal till approach, this grower is kind of starting with kind of flipping the soil or inverting the soil, which maybe is with the assist of a two-wheel tractor or something like that. That's going to be dependent upon the kind of conditions that the growers have. So like in this case, if there's reason to make sure that soil is broken up, maybe there's subsoil compaction, or if there's poor drainage, some of those things, it might be a reasonable idea to kind of start with some sort of tillage, but then figure out how to dial things back. Depending upon how much organic matter growers are able to add in that kind of initial bed building, and a number of different kind of soil quality considerations. It may be that things like a broad fork or a potato fork will still need to be used, even if the beds aren't being kind of tilled consistently. And so, there's kind of a nuance in that minimal or no till that then gets balanced with, how the crops are performing really, and making sure that they have, the crops have what they need to be healthy, and that you're kind of building some of those ideal conditions for the plants to be able to grow. I think one of the tricks with kind of no-till intensive vegetable production is making sure that those kind of ideal conditions are being met, and conceding in some circumstances that may mean some sort of kind of soil remodeling, whether that's removing kind of large rocks or things like that, doing some of that broad forking, or kind of other deep subsoil compaction, alleviating some of that subsoil compaction to make sure that there's like adequate physical structure, while also kind of getting tuned in terms of the chemical conditions, while paying attention to what you're doing to support the biological activity in the soil.
Weeds, like around here, it's this grass. I don't know, quack grass, whatever anyone calls it, the rhizome spreading grasses.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh. Yeah. So I'm redoing my beds this year. Like I previously had, like I'd have 5.5 foot beds because I was using a tractor, but I bought a BCS.
Oh wow.
And I'm gonna do my permanent beds with that. I've already got one section done and I'm loving it. To get rid of the grass in between. So I'll do like blocks of 8 and then have a grass strip. But right now, some of my beds are like a 5.5 foot bed and then a strip of grass and then another 5.5 foot bed and strip of grass. And that grass just, yeah, even with landscape fabric, I use a lot of landscape fabric because I can use it, reuse it, and then it saves on the weeding and the hoeing and the cultivation.
Yeah, so in vegetable production beds of this nature, it's somewhat common for there to be some grass strips there, and thinking about rhizome spreading grasses like Bermuda grass or Johnson grass, things like that. Really, will consistently be creeping in upon and kind of infringing upon the bed space that you're establishing. There are some reasons to have grass strips. Thinking about the way that water moves through the land maybe is one consideration. So if it allows growers to get in the field to be harvesting or working around or whatever, sometimes those grass strips could help at least minimize some of the mud and the muck and things like that. But then it does come along with that kind of ongoing work of, establishing your bed lines and or investing in some sort of other kind of physical barrier that would keep the grass out of your beds, which is obviously has a kind of input cost and associated with it. I think that the use of landscape fabric or different plastic mulches and things like that, pretty common for vegetable growers, in organic settings and otherwise, because the management of weeds becomes this essential task, which, in most circumstances, folks are going to be limited by labor capacity and things like that.
Squash bugs on squash. Squash bugs are a big one around here. I know a lot of people complain about that because I think Azira is the only organic approved pesticide for that. And it's like super expensive. So I'm sure that's what like the big farmers would use. Like if you had a whole field of it and you don't want to lose it. I was going to say the cabbage worms, cabbage loppers, big one.
Yeah.
I think everybody has to spray BT because she can sit there and pick them off. Because like the blackberries with the spotted winged Drosophila and all that stuff, I don't do a lot of spraying. Like I have sprays that I can use, but I'm so like not wanting to. It's not even like, oh, I don't want to spray anything. It's just like, oh, the whole hassle of having to spray it. So I eat most of the berries myself, but the strawberries are cool because they're early enough that we don't have that pest issue. I really haven't had any trouble with diseases. Towards the end of the season, like with the tomatoes, I'll start to get a little bit of leaf dying at the bottom, but I try to keep all that pretty cleaned up underneath. So typically by the time they get it, because like I started undercover and I use like the Partridge and that word, the ones that don't need to be pollinated by another plant. Anyway, so you do that undercover, and then by the time that you got squash coming on and stuff, then the plants are pretty big. They can tolerate the bugs, and then by the time they kill the plants, you're like, I don't want to see another squash in my life. So you're like, take them, I don't care. Like if I do have to spray, mostly BT is like the one that I have to use, because if you want to sell kale or any brassica, it's going to have worms on it if you don't spray it regularly. You can wash them in the beginning of the season if they're teeny tiny. And in the beginning of the season, I do like to just pick, and I'll just flip leaves over as I'm picking pretty quick, just to make sure there's nothing crawling on there.
I mean, I think that these options seem pretty solid, especially given that context of not and understandably not wanting to kind of go through the additional work of spraying, not to mention the potential challenges to other biological control agents or other beneficial insects that could be in the surrounding area. And yeah, I mean, I think that the approach that the grower is describing is a solid one. It involves some level of kind of upkeep and maintenance as well, but it's one that consistently seems to work for growers. And in doing so, say with the summer squash and things like that, having that jump start on the season by growing seedlings indoors, making sure that they get the cover that they need early on in their life as well, or at least that they're monitored, and putting them out under row cover or under kind of insect netting, and making sure that stays secure. Could help with the insects that were described, but also may help minimize damage from rabbits or from groundhogs and things like that like to eat squash early on. Also is going to keep away the cucumber beetles and help and the vine borers to help those plants get established. So even though in a lot of cases it's somewhat inevitable for there to be some of these pests, the hope is having those ideal soil conditions so that the plants could metabolize and grow and photosynthesize all they need to be able to mount those defenses, or at least get established, so that there aren't going to be kind of major impacts on crop health. Similarly with the brassicas, there's just the note for growers that it really doesn't take much for some of the adults of the cabbage worms to sneak in under the insect netting or the row cover. And so making sure that there's kind of solid strategies for keeping the row cover secure, and in between harvesting and stuff like that, it's properly put back into place. Could help along with the brassicas and the use of BT to kill some of those cabbage worms. One additional thing related to the squash. There are some trials, I believe, that came out of Lincoln University, where growers were exploring the use of certain classes of cucurbits that are known to kind of be a preferable target for squash bugs. So I believe blue Hubbard squash was one of them that was showing some potential as a trap crop. And so the idea would be growing that kind of trap crop early that would attract some of the potential pests, utilizing an organic pesticide or finding some other strategy for termination, as a way to kind of distract the pests from the crops that are trying to be focused on. But in their circumstance, it seems like it's a little bit that would be a little bit more involved, but just kind of an example of a combination of utilizing trap crops, I guess, in this circumstance. With the brassicas, there's this kind of general notion that some allium family crops could help, or some like mint family crops could help with kind of pushing away the cabbage moths. I can tell you that I've tried that anecdotally, I guess, many times, and haven't really seen it effectively work, especially if you're trying to get kind of marketable products. So I think that utilizing the insect netting or row cover is probably a safer strategy to get through. Yeah, the kind of topic of managing disease in tomatoes is and kind of different pruning techniques and things like that. I think is a contentious one to say the least, and there are a number of differing perspectives in terms of what sort of pruning is justified and what is not. But in general, what the farm is describing is some of these kind of lower leaves of the plants that you'll see possibly being infected by pathogens, or over the life of the plant just kind of not thriving or yellowing at the bottom of the plant. And yeah, I think that it's generally considered a good practice to do some of that pruning at the bottom of the plant. Depending on the setup that a grower is using, it's pretty common for, let's say in field tomatoes, to have kind of stakes that are about 5 feet apart, 5 to 6 feet apart. The tomato plant's about 2 feet apart, and using like a Florida weave technique to help keep those trellised and up. And then the utilization of mulch, like straw, to help reduce the splash of kind of soil particles up onto those bottom leaves, which becomes this kind of major highway for the flow of a number of different pathogens, but in a lot of cases, fungal pathogens. And then pruning the bottom leaves of the plant once the plant gets established, anywhere from 12 to 18 inches. Again, trying to minimize any kind of leaf to soil contact, as that becomes this kind of major highway for pathogens to potentially impact tomatoes and yields. And then trellising, kind of adding the lines of trellising on your solid posts as the plant grows, to keep the plant up and off the ground, and also keep the plant manageable in terms of harvesting and things like that. In different tunnel settings, in intensive tomato production, there are growers who are using kind of single leader strategies and lower and lean methods to kind of have denser planting, so that the plants would be grown probably closer to like 12 to 18 inch spacing, sometimes with a single lead or a double lead, where kind of getting familiar with how tomato plants grow. They're going to have a kind of main leader, but then there will be these the suckers that kind of come off kind of in this like kind of armpit of the plant, but on the upper part of that armpit, and growers would kind of pinch those off to kind of keep the growth of the plant streamline on that one major lead. The fruit would come off of, and the fruit clusters would come off of that major lead. But then you need to have the trellising infrastructure and a strategy of kind of keeping them tied up on a line using clips and things of that nature. The hope in that approach is making it easy to harvest, increasing the density of the plants, but then pruning for airflow to reduce the risk of fungal pathogens. The other thing to keep in mind is like the keeping things clean or sanitized when you're doing some of that work or removing damaged plants. So if wiping tools before and after use, if you're using pruners, or if you're kind of moving kind of physically between plants, trying not to go from diseased plants to healthy plants, as that could be a major way that the pathogens could flow as well. There are some growers that caution like waiting to handle plants until the dew in the morning has evaporated, and then trying not to handle the plants in wet conditions, as that just I think that the idea is that helps with the helps minimize the transfer of potential fungal pathogens.
So I do the Lee Summit Farmers Market because there's only one of me.
Sure.
I was doing the Odessa one on Thursdays, but what I found is because I have a limited amount of produce, because of storage and time, it was more of just a hassle of like, okay, I'll allot so much for the Odessa one, and then I sit there for 2.5 hours and make like $30, where I'd rather just consolidate it all for Saturday and do one stop. I don't have, like, I would love to do another Saturday market once I have more produce after the packing shed is done. But then I would have to find someone to actually do it. Because the Saturday markets, I think, are the bigger markets. So we are hopefully this season putting in a packing wash pack shed. I have a 10 by 10 walk-in cooler that's in pieces out there that needs to be put together, so I have storage. Because I was telling my husband, I'm like, I could grow a lot more, but I have nowhere to put it. I say it's like playing Tetris with the fridge. I'm like sitting there going, okay, it's got to go here, and it's just frustrating. Kind of in an impasse now where I can't produce more. Another outlet that's possible is there's a co-op locally here, but like I said, I haven't produced enough to want to sell wholesale when I only have enough to sell at the market level. So we'll see after this year if the packing shed gets finished. I would expect that would increase sales. You know, if I want to just provide head lettuce, it'd be a lot easier than providing a mix. So things like that would be like, okay, well, head lettuce here is fine, but for the my own sales where I can get a higher margin, I like the salad mix, because you can get a lot more, you know, per unit.
Hi, I'm Mary Hendrickson. I'm an associate professor of rural sociology here at the University of Missouri. Let's talk about what are some of the things that farmers need to think about before they enter into any marketing channel. And this goes for crop farmers and vegetable growers and fruit growers and any kind of organic specialty grower. Everyone has to think about what's it going to take to get into these marketing channels. What's going to be the benefits of these different marketing channels? What are going to be the costs? So first of all, a farmer really has to think about what is the time? How much time is it going to take for a farmer to access these markets? So do you really want to spend 4 hours on a Saturday morning at a farmer's market? Or are you really interested in doing a set of weekly deliveries where you can get it over and done with, you know how much to bring, and so on? What's your legal liability? Do you have product insurance, product liability insurance? If you're going to sell to something like a university dining service, maybe you're going to need $1 million in product liability. What's the ease of entry into the marketplace? How easy is it to get in there and sell, and how much that relates to time? How much time is it going to take you? What about what kind of packaging and presentation do you have to have? What kind of food safety regulations do you have to follow? And with food safety regulations, is your end consumer actually asking you for some different kinds of things? For some people, what is the income distribution throughout the year is really an important aspect to think about. Like, are you only going to have income in the summer months, and that's going to be what I have to live on for the rest of the year? Or are there ways to diversify your income stream throughout the year? What is the price stability of that? Does your price just suddenly drop in July and August? Or is there a way to get a smaller price or a lower price and then keep it stable over the term? And then finally, what is the volume of product that you can sell, and what kind of variability can you sell? So these are all important questions actually for produce growers and for elderberry growers and for other kinds of specialty growers, fruit growers, crop growers. However, the answers are going to be different depending on which kinds of product and what kind of product mix you have. And then what are your own proclivities to market? Do you like to interact directly with consumers? Then you might do well at direct marketing. If you don't like to do that, then think of other things to do. So let's run through some of these for produce growers. So farmers markets are really great. They're, especially with the price, you get the full price from the farmers market. They're easy to get into, even though some of our well-established farmers markets have waiting lists for farmers to get into. in general, you can find a farmer's market. You can experiment with products. You can get direct feedback from customers right then and there. They like your products, or they don't. They don't like the way you picked this one. They want that the squash picked a little younger. You get that direct feedback. You can experiment with your product mix, and you can do this relatively cheaply. There's low capital requirement, but there's a lot of disadvantages with a farmer's market as well. You have small volumes of many different kinds of products. Can be very time intensive. So are you really interested in sitting there every Saturday morning for 4 or 5 hours and making sales, or maybe not making sales? You get a retail price, but it can fluctuate when during the season. So maybe you have something early and you get a good price, and then the rest of the tomatoes come on, and then that's it. It's very weather dependent unless you are at a market that has invested in something like a pavilion or a covered shelter. So there's a lot of really good things about farmers markets, but there are some disadvantages. The other thing I would suggest is to really find out how many organic market farmers are in that particular market. And this can be really important because as an organic producer, you're competing against those conventional producers. Yes, you don't have the same product, but the price and the sticker shock, it's a lot easier for some consumers to say, I don't really want to pay $8, $9 a pound for that broccoli when this person over here is selling in a box for maybe 5 or 6, right? It's really hard, even though you've got a different product. Consumers are comparing it right there in real time. So lots of good things about farmers markets, but some problems too. Now, some people have decided it's been a popular way to market organic product is through community supported agriculture. There's some really good advantages of that. You diversify your income over a number of different months. You share the risk with members in the best form of CSAs. You create really loyal customers and satisfying relationships. However, there's a lot of turnover in CSAs, and a lot of time consumers just aren't prepared for the commitment to a CSA that it actually requires. It also requires a lot of management skills. Like a farmer's market, you're going to have to produce a huge number of different crops, and you're going to have them coming in on a fairly predictable basis. So it's going to take you a lot of good planning skills. I do not recommend new organic farmers to try a CSA for several years. And there's a lot of customer management unless you can get a core group of members who really help you manage that. So lots of good things about a CSA. You're sharing the risk, you're getting a good price, but also pretty difficult to do. Remember, with any kind of direct marketing, consumers can be fickle. So direct marketing, like a farmer's market or a CSA, requires extra effort on the part of consumers. They can't just go to the grocery store where they're getting everything else. They're coming to a special market, and not all consumers are willing to do that. Finally, you might consider things like roadside stand or U-pick operation. Great things about these: if you're in a wonderful location, it's great, but weather issues, you have to supervise the customers. There could be liability issues you need to check on, matching the volume of your customers to the product. There are a lot of downsides, but the upsides are there's a lot of lower costs for packaging and presentation, and you can be pretty flexible in your scheduling time, and you don't have to run 2 or 3 hours to a farmer's market where you can get good organic prices. Now, the other really interesting thing about this is that these kinds of roadside stands can be an avenue for cooperation with other farmers. Perhaps you are in a good location with your farm on a high visibility location. You could also sell other producers' products. And so there's a lot of really interesting ways of doing that. Finally, once you start to get into some of the wholesale relationships, you have to think a little bit harder about um, how you want to do that. Do you have enough volume to supply a wholesaler? Are there ways to cooperate with other farmers to get the kind of volume you need to supply? So you need a consistent quantity of product that you can, on a weekly basis, usually, that you can supply to like a restaurant or a natural food store or a grocery chain. And that's going to take a pretty high volume of product. It also means a lower price for you, but you get rid of all those costs, like extra costs for sitting out there in the rain at the farmer's market. So there's a lot of really good things about selling to a wholesaler. Now, restaurants, food services, we saw with the pandemic that those could prove to be fickle markets, right? So people that were relying on just one market channel, they were hurt through the pandemic. So I think the lesson for organic producers and others is to really diversify your market channel. Almost all growers I know are diversified into a direct channel like farmers markets and CSAs, sometimes together, or they're doing farmers markets and they're doing local drop off for at restaurants and food services. And they might also be selling higher volume product into a local grocery store chain. So you have to really match your capacity to produce with the market. So if you're going to try to get into a grocery store that has 15 locations in your city, that's a little different than selling directly to one or two stores. So you just have to go back and take your time evaluating.